say? The heck is repartee?
Hey, welcome. We'll tell you what the heck repartee is. Repartee
All right,
is our...
You're listening to the Minnesota Progressive Repartee. Whatever.
It's
hosted by Doug Padgett, Brett Johnson, and Hunter Hawes.
That's what it is. That's what it is. It's our afternoon conversation. It's normally on Tuesdays. Brett is playing my role, and I'm off doing whatever it is I do on Tuesdays. But, Brett, thank you so much for filling in for me yesterday, and I'm glad to repay the favor for you today because we, my friend, are good Minnesotans, and we leave no debt unpaid.
Absolutely, indeed.
So it's always a no problem. I'll pay you back right away. So you filled in for me yesterday, and I'm paying you back today. Hey, I heard you doing the weather bit there, and just hearing the 10 below, 17 below, 20 below, it's
30 below.
It seems as if the motto around here in Minnesota is when they go high, we go below zero.
Oh, I like it. Well done there.
Yeah, thank you. That's my political weather joke. It's really, really cold. I was in Arizona until this morning, so I will remind all of us it won't stay like this, and it's not like this everywhere. So if you live here in Minnesota, as I do on purpose, embrace this as best you can. If you're here because you're somehow being held hostage, I don't know, because you're in the witness protection program, your spouse or person you love has a job here and you can't get out, your children or grandchildren or parents are here and they're holding you against your will, living in this state, I don't know how you manage it. I don't know how you get along. But the rest of us who are here on purpose, this is when we remind one another how hardy we actually are. This is when we brag about it just a little bit at the same time we complain. It's a brag complain. There needs to be a word made up for that when you complain about something and are bragging about it at the same time. Like there's a humble brag. There's like a complain brag. And that's what we do in Minnesota when it gets just so, I'm looking out a window and there are big pine trees outside my window that are shaking from the wind. And that wind is like 20 miles an hour, and it's 10 below zero air temperature. So when that wind is moving at 20 miles an hour and it is 10 below air that's moving at you, the experience on your skin is incredible. So get outside, get a breath of fresh air, and only make it one breath, and then get right back in because it's brutally cold. It's brutally cold. Do you get outside, Brett, when it gets cold like this, or do you try to lay low? Like, do you bundle up and go for a walk?
Not in this weather. No, not if I can avoid it. But I know the pets go a little bit quicker outside. Letting my mom's dog out the
That is a great.
Not messing around. Yeah.
Yes.
He likes to sniff around, but no, not today. He knows he's got to do his business quickly
and get back in. I mean, they don't even have skin. Well, I guess they do have skin below all that fur, but they're like designed for this. These animals, and they even know. That's what I think about when I think about how cold it is. I'd love to have somebody on who understands animals, like how they live in the wild, because I don't understand how deer and bunnies and anything else that's above ground and little chipmunks, unless they all burrow underground. But I know bunnies and deer don't. They're just outside all the time. It's going to be 29 below zero tomorrow night. Like, how do their little noses not get frostbite on them and everything else? I don't know how animals live out there. And then I think about people 100 years ago. I live in a house that was built roughly 100 years ago, maybe a little more than 100 years ago. And if we didn't update, all of our windows, if we hadn't updated our furnace 100 years ago when it got this cold, which it did, I mean, these houses were just freezing, let alone indigenous peoples who lived in these lands, and they were living in what people would have lived in 350, 400, 500 years ago on this land. It's amazing to me that you could wrap yourself in, not even in synthetics like we have today, but in some kind of animal skin and some version of layered cotton and maybe some wool, and you're living in in housing outdoors that is not sealed and weatherproofed. And you don't have an enormous furnace blowing out 96,000 BTUs of heat like I have on the wall right across from me here, where it's keeping me nice and toasty warm. I don't know how people lived like that. It's just amazing. how people tolerated it and then stayed here anyway. Like when it thawed, they didn't just all say, "Oh my God, I'm leaving and I'm never coming back. This is outrageous." Instead, they laid down roots and said to their children and grandchildren, "This is home. Welcome home." That's why I like to say that we who are here on purpose, a little thing we brag about, how cold it is.
You think it's layers and just fire they used back then? Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
I mean, give that a try. Give it. I mean, look, if you can go to REI and afford to buy some top shelf outdoor gear that's designed to be lightweight, windproof, breathable, all the rest of it. But boy, you get yourself inside of a teepee or a hut of some kind, or a wood shack, and you're bundling up with layers of animal skins and wool and some kind of cotton, you're going to start sweating because you're not going to be able to regulate the heat. And then as that because it gets so hot in there, and then when the fire goes down, it's going to be 12 below in your house, in your place. I just don't know how people survived. I don't know how the animals survive it. I don't get any of this because it's. I think my constitution is I feel like it's so cold out there, it's just going to kill everyone because we cancel events now all over the state of Minnesota, especially here in the Twin Cities. People are canceling all kinds of things. They're canceling civic events. They're canceling private events because you don't want your car to break down. What in the world did some guy do when he was riding around on a horse? It's unbelievable. Hey, Jeff, in St. Louis Park, you've got some thoughts on how they handled cold weather in the earlier days?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just my head's full of trivia, so
I love
just
this.
a little aside. The band Three Dog Night was named after the fact that when it was really cold, you put the dogs in bed with you, and if it was really cold, it was a three-dog night.
It's cold enough to have it be a three-dog, like you needed one on the side, on each side, and one on top of you. Is that the sort of idea for three-dog
probably.
night?
Yep.
Oh man! So like, imagine what it's like to live at a time where, in order to stay warm, you've got to pull a dog into your bed. Like that's desperate. That's desperate cold.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine it. I've been out for a few minutes out, and it's. I'm living in rural Minnesota right now, and it's really windy and it's really tough.
Are you outstate? Are you in outstate Minnesota right now?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, wow. And out there, there's no block in the wind. The other thing that amazes me about how tough the people are that have lived in this state long before all the technologies that we have, both weather technology or indoor heating technology, but also weather prediction technology. We knew this was coming. People planned for it. 100 years ago, the temperature could drop 30 degrees, 40 degrees over 2 or 3 days like it did over the last couple of days, and you have no idea what's happening. Like, this is not the kind of thing you can look at the sky and say, like, oh, you know what's going to be happening now? The low-pressure system that's been holding the Arctic air in Canada has collapsed, and this cold air is coming rushing down. They have no idea. You're just out, and it's 28 degrees one day, and 3 days later, it's 29 below. So you don't even have the ability to prepare for it. Unbelievable how tough we've been.
Yeah, well, back in the 40s, they had the Armistice Day blizzard, and that's what happened that day. Apparently, the temperature dropped like 30 degrees during the day, and they had no idea it was coming.
What years was that? Did you say the 1930s?
It was in the 40s. It was in the 40s sometime. I remember my dad talking about it. You know, that it was like 40 degrees or something in the morning, and then by night it was this monstrous blizzard that killed a bunch of people. So
and just have no idea that it's coming. We've done so much with all the predictions and the rest of it. Well, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your trivia, and you're always welcome. Yep. You're always welcome to throw that trivia into the repartee, the banter about all progressive things going on. Hey, on another notes of cold, Stone Cold Roger Stone. The confidant and emotional and spiritual advisor to the President of the United States, through his lawyer today, pled not guilty, which kind of surprised me. I didn't have a chance to see it, but I heard or I read about it that he didn't say anything in his pleading. He only let his attorneys do his pleading for him. Not very Roger Stone-like. I think they probably said, Roger, zip it. You're going to go to jail for the rest of your life, and we're going to try to do what we can to get you some level of leniency. And let me just add again, one more time, there is a associate of the Trump administration that has been credibly charged with actions working against the best interest of this country. Just let that settle in on another day. Hey, Bernie from Northeast, you know a little bit about that Armistice Day blizzard as well?
Yes, that was 1940.
1940.
And it was after that Governor, the youngest governor we ever had, Sasson, worked hard enough to get a local weather forecasting center in Minneapolis. Before that, everything was coming in from Chicago.
Huh. Well, that's a great piece of trivia.
Coming from Chicago.
And it was that blizzard in 1940 that gave the sort of energy behind saying we really need to be able to forecast weather locally here in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Fantastic.
Correct.
But look at all the things that good people of AM 950 community know. Hey, Bernie, I hope you'll join us over at the Blue State Ball on March 2nd.
I plan to be there.
Excellent. Look forward to meeting you, my friend. And thanks for being part of the repartee. And all of you, hey, stay warm out there. We'll talk a little bit more about Roger Stone when we come back. And also Tina Smith, our senator, is in the news with a bill of her own, thinking about the contractors on after the federal shutdown here on the repartee on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
Hi there.
Hey, welcome back to the repartee. Doug Padgett in today, and hope you heard Brett's cute little play on words. The repartee invites you to the repartee, the Minnesota progressive voice of Minnesota's Blue State Ball over at the Blaisdell on March 2nd. So we hope that you'll make it in for us. You make it in, join us. We'd really love to see you there. And especially me, I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of the listeners and especially some of the frequent callers. And we're chatting a little bit about this weather and what's going on because, as good Minnesotans, you can talk about the weather all day without even saying anything. And it's kind of important. There's a lot to sort of imagine this. And Robert Pilot, who hosts the Native Roots radio show on this station, I will say probably the best radio show on this station. In fact, Robert, I'll give you that credit, was good enough to call and knows a little bit of trivia about the Armistice Day. But I also, Robert, wonder if you can give any reflections on how it is that Native peoples survived weather like this when they were so cold. What were those stories that that were told about the communities that have been living on this land when it's been cold for so long?
Well, if you've ever been in a teepee, the fire right in the middle keeps it very warm with the skin around the teepee, and then also a chapotake, which is like a wigwam. Those are like little buildings. So it was pretty easy to keep warm, and so one of the things I was listening to your show, and you have the best show on, by the way.
You do. Is
that in 1940, there was two businessmen from Chicago that were stranded in St. Paul or Minneapolis, and what they were taught to do. They were some of the early people in AA. If they felt stressed out or freaked out, they went and helped and talked to another drunk, and that's during that blizzard. Two businessmen were stranded here, and they started AA in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities.
That is a great
amazing.
Story. That is a great story. That the foundation of having AA meetings in Minnesota started in 1940 because people were stuck here because of a blizzard. That is
right.
That's a silver lining if there ever was one. And I can imagine.
And I heard about that too, where like people were out hunting in the middle of the day, and it was like 40, 50 degrees, and then by the end, there was deaths, and it was unbelievable change of events in the weather. I just can't believe. I'm 57 years old, and I just can't believe how accurate they are with weather nowadays.
I know, it's really incredible. I mean, they've nailed this one. I complain quite often about how the forecasts, seem like just random guesses of approximation. But when it really matters, they do tend to get it right an awful lot of the time. Like they know how weather patterns move now. We've observed it long enough. And maybe people knew this stuff years ago, 100, 150, 200, 250 years ago. But I would imagine most weather, even things we're experiencing like today, just snuck up on people and could actually be quite dangerous. So, hey, Robert, thanks so much for your show, and thanks for coming.
I just know that one thing that the natives really followed the animals and what they were doing, and they predict a lot of things if you watch them carefully. Well,
that's fascinating. I would let's talk about doing a show like that. People that know how to follow animal behavior and to interpret it, because wouldn't that be interesting if even cold fronts like this, animals have a way to feel that the I don't know, somehow the pressure is changing, to know that this cold.
Well, they do with those tsunamis. They follow those animals. If you watch tsunamis, people these animals predict it way before humans or any of the predictors out in the ocean. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've heard that you rarely find animals drowned in tsunamis because they can sense that whatever caused the disruption, in the ocean, they sensed it first, and they head for high land, and people should follow. Mm-hmm. It's one of those connections between all living creatures and all things that a lot of us just aren't very good at anymore. Hey, Robert, thanks for listening, buddy, and thanks for your show.
Hey, take care. Have a great show.
And one of the things Brett and I want to talk about today, and we've reached out to Tina Smith, our senator, because she's in the news in a good way. She is championing a bill that no Republican senators have currently signed on to. And a number, more than 20 Democrats have signed on to it, and not a single Republican as of yet. And it's a bill that's guaranteeing back pay for government contractors. Now, you might know how all this works, but there's an awful lot of people who work for the federal government, but their employer is a third-party contractor. So the federal government, like a lot of businesses, chooses to use another hiring agency and management agency to fulfill their work. This will happen in people that work in federal buildings and cafeterias. Sometimes are not working for the federal government. They're working for a food company that's contracted by the federal government. Then the employees work for that company that's been hired. And this will happen across all kinds of industries, from small contractors, like just somebody who has a one-off contract, to entire portions of the money that's spent in the federal government. Well, Tina Smith is saying, hey, are Donald Trump caving on his demands? Fortunately, because fortunately the guy is a quitter and a caveman. So that's the good news for us in this country, is that he's not going to fulfill his promises. And he didn't fulfill his promises on the shutdown. And so they've found a way now to pay the furloughed federal workers, the ones whose W-9s or 1099s are connected specifically to the federal government. But there's a bunch of these contractors, a bunch of these other people. And it's a lot, hundreds of thousands of people. And they're not guaranteed by the legislation that's been passed so far that they're going to ever receive the pay that's currently in the budget to pay them. So Tina Smith is saying that she wants to pass some legislation that will allow as many as 580,000 contractors to be paid that which the budget currently has allotted for them to be paid. So far, no Republicans have joined in, no senators. Now, I'm sure they're in a tough spot, because I can imagine the Republicans who find themselves held hostage to the ideology of the libertarians and of the small government conservatives, who want to say, look, if government workers are not mandatory or they're not essential, then why would we have them in the first place? This is a good way to reduce the amount of people we pay in the federal government. It's like somebody who says, the good thing about having the flu is you lost a little extra weight. Well, no, it's not actually a good thing that you lose a bunch of weight when you're sick, and it's not a good thing to try to reduce the federal workforce by just not paying people when you have an agreement to pay them. So I can imagine a lot of Republicans don't know how to think about this. They don't want to be paying people if they didn't do the work. So in other words, if you're a security guard and you didn't go to work those days, or you work in a cafeteria and you didn't have to work those shifts for 35 days, they may not want to pay you. The problem is you made a deal. You would have gone to work as an employee. The reason you didn't work isn't because you sat it out. It's because your workplace made it impossible for you to work. And why should you be punished for not being paid, for not being able to perform your job when it was your very workplace that prevented you from doing your job. So Tina Smith, Senator from Minnesota, is right about this. Now, we'd like to have her on the show. We keep inviting her. She was unavailable for comment, supporting her own bill here on Minnesota's progressive repartee. But we still want to cheer her on this one and want to prod all the Republicans to do the right thing for once and pay the contractors, because you, Republican senators, block them from going to work. I'm Doug Padgett. This is AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, on Minnesota's progressive repartee. And welcome back to Minnesota's progressive repartee. Doug Padgett in. I'm really thrilled. I heard that little ad from Brett there about if your house is so cold that you need to have a blanket or something, and I'm one of those. My house is not properly insulated. On days like today, I need a blanket. So maybe you're like that as well. And stay warm today. And thanks for being with us here on AM 950. I'm glad to talk with Megan Tackney, and Megan is the program manager for Pathways to Freedom. And that's important because they do great work in labor and sex trafficking and trying to do what they can to help cities respond and prevent that. So, Megan, thanks so much for being on with us today.
Thank you so much, Doug.
So Megan, I was walking through the airport this morning, the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, and there are big pop-up signs, like on banners that say, "Watch for human trafficking." Those are new. I feel like they came around about a year ago, maybe just before the Super Bowl or something. And I've heard for a lot of years about how important it is for cities and for citizens to take seriously the issue of human trafficking. But boy, a lot of people don't know anything about it. I've watched people look at those signs and not even understand the phrase human trafficking or knowing what human trafficking is. And with your work at Pathways to Freedom, you help cities, including the city of Minneapolis, to take seriously issues of labor and sex trafficking. Can you talk a bit about what's going on around the world and why your work is so important and why cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul have to respond to it?
Sure. So we know that every year thousands of people here in the United States are exploited and trafficked for both labor and sex through force, fraud, and coercion, which are the elements we talk about in human trafficking. We know that survivors have been identified in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and that they can be men, women, adults, children, foreign nationals, and they can be in U.S. cities in every race, sexual orientation, and gender identity. I think often people have a picture in their head of who a human trafficking survivor is and what they look like. And that we know that human trafficking survivors as a whole have vulnerabilities that traffickers take advantage of. So whether it be being homeless, domestic violence, fear of retaliation, such as getting deported, being economically disadvantaged, struggling with addiction, facing discrimination, such as if you're an LGBT youth, or having a history in the foster care system. Now, at the same time, we also know that human trafficking survivors are in and often are interacting with local governments, including yours in Minneapolis, and many community systems. So things like labor enforcement, immigration, child welfare, housing. However, people just may not be aware of it. And that's where our program, Pathways to Freedom, which I'd love to tell you more about, really comes in.
Yeah, tell us about that. What is it that Pathways to Freedom does specifically, in your work with cities or with organizations or individuals?
Yeah, so what we're doing in Minneapolis is a few unique things. First of all, we are supporting the local government. So we fund a full-time senior advisor on human trafficking in the city coordinator's office.
Wow.
Can
I just pause you there for a second? I didn't know this. Mm-hmm. You help fund or do fund a full-time employee whose job it is to advise the city of Minneapolis on issues of trafficking.
That's right. And actually,
Wow.
Doug, there's actually only 3 other cities in the United States that has an advisor, and 2 of them are in our program. So that's also the city of Atlanta, the city of Chicago, and a few years ago, the city of Houston started this. So Minneapolis stands with only 3 other cities in the U.S. that has a full-time person who advises the mayor and the city coordinator on how to address root causes of human trafficking and support to survivors. So the approach that we're taking is pretty unique, and Minneapolis is at the front of this conversation, and we're really looking for them to lead and provide learning to the rest of the nation.
And why Why is there a full-time employee here in Minneapolis? Is it because we're more responsive, or the need is higher? What are the conditions that cause this to be one of just a few cities?
Yeah, so I would start a few ways. So our project, which is called Pathways to Freedom, actually started as a city competition. It's supported by two foundations, so Humanity United and the Novo Foundation. So 14 cities applied to be in the program, so all the big players, all the major cities, and we selected Atlanta, Minneapolis, and Chicago. And we did that for a few unique reasons. One is just a long history and dedication to the issue. So the state of Minnesota, both on the federal level, the state level, as well as the local level, has really been dedicated to this issue for a long time. So I think we saw that. We also saw a commitment to working on the issue in a new way. So what I mean by that is, to start addressing both labor and sex trafficking. Historically, a lot of people associate trafficking with just sexual exploitation, and It's actually both labor and sex. And then the next piece would be a dedication to really expanding the city systems that are at the table. So traditionally, law enforcement is often involved, but there's many other city systems that we know human trafficking survivors and those at risk are interacting with. So the city of Minneapolis really stepped up and say, okay, how do we get housing involved? How do we get labor enforcement involved? How do we broaden the conversation? And so, Minneapolis was chosen both because they were previously leaders, and we knew there was the capacity to create new leadership in this area.
On your website, pathwaystofreedom.org, which people should take a look at, there's one of the blog posts there that says it's not just about sex, human trafficking, and mega sporting events. And I'll tell you, that's something that I have thought. Most of what I've heard about, in the news about human trafficking is about sex workers that are brought in for mega sporting events, the Super Bowl, Final Four, things that like the city of Minneapolis and others try really hard to have in our cities. And there's always this shadowy dark side of the criminal elements that follow all of that. And you want to make an important point that it's not just about these occasional times, a week or two, and it's not just sex, it's also long-term labor exploitation. Here's my question for you. Is it possible that people like me or others would be interacting with people who are being trafficked for labor without knowing it? Like, I feel like I'm pretty clean as far as like there's no guilt on I don't think I'm interacting with trafficked sex workers even when the Super Bowl is here, right? So it feels like an issue that's distanted from me and not something that I feel vulnerable to participating in. But then when I hear you and the good work that your organization does remind us that it's not just sex workers on occasion, it's labor workers. Are there pretty traditional ways or common ways that people like me are actually interacting with those who have been trafficked for labor?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because I think there is a ton of myths and misperceptions about trafficking. So to start, we believe it's important to address both labor and sex trafficking. But to specifically your question, I think what people have to understand is that labor trafficking exists on a spectrum of exploitation, which has multiple forms of labor violations. So just to give you an example, there may be a restaurant worker who isn't given their paycheck, let's say on a specific day, and that does not necessarily make them a victim of labor trafficking. However, if that restaurant worker, let's say, is having their pay withheld, or if their employer is threatening to have them deported, or if they're being sexually harassed and they're afraid, and all of these things are happening all at the same time, then that may be labor trafficking. So it's very possible that you may be interacting with someone who's experiencing labor trafficking right now. However, one of the reasons we're working with SayTool, specifically in Minneapolis, is to really get to the economic and other sort of social injustice issues that you can address sort of before labor trafficking occurs, that is just as effective as addressing it, at the moment in time. So whether that be ensuring that workers have the ability to identify industries that have frequent violations of workers' rights, the ability to advocate for yourself in the workplace, and to do that without fear of retaliation.
That's excellent. I'm speaking with Megan Tackney. She is the program manager for Pathways to Freedom, which is an initiative calling cities to challenge their assumptions about who human trafficking survivors are and to spur those cities into responses and innovations of solutions. What's some good news in all of this? It's not very often that you hear people talking about good news when it comes to issues that are so heavy and so dark. What are some of the success stories that are going on right now that you're proud to tell people about?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think to even start, I think people in Minneapolis should be proud that their city is stepping up in this way.
Right on.
So again, you have some really key players. You have a leader in your city coordinator's office. You have a workers' rights organization. In fact, you have multiple. So in our case, we're supporting Saytool, who's also working with the A-Wood Center in Minneapolis to really lead among the East African community. So I think that's the first right step. And then I think there's a lot of exciting things to come down the way. So I know for you guys within the city coordinator's office, thinking about new things on labor enforcement, thinking about you have a new immigration advisor. So there are people who may be at the table who previously were not. And then in terms of, what we hope to see at the end of the day is really new policies, practices, and funding that goes to root causes and support to survivors. And we hope that Minneapolis is a model for other cities across the nation, that this is also what they should be doing.
It seems pretty clear to me that if someone's being sex trafficked, that there's workers that they can reach out to. There's people they can go to. Are there people who are equally as available if someone's experiencing labor trafficking? And this can be an odd question, but is it possible that someone wouldn't recognize right away that they were being impacted themselves by labor trafficking? Like, is some of this an educational role that has to be played in our cities so that workers will know that the way they're being treated is not right and there's someone they can turn to?
Yeah, and so I think the good news is the city of Minneapolis has a really strong base of organizing around labor. So again, one of the reasons we work with Saytool, who works in coordination with many other worker centers in Minneapolis, is that they provide a lot of leadership development with workers to address things like wage theft, safety violations, that may be signs that there may be at risk of labor trafficking, or that may actually be what's going on, but they may not be aware of it. So that kind of leadership development is key. And then partnership across, organizations who work on low-wage worker justice is important in the city so that people can talk to each other about patterns they might be seeing or experiencing themselves. And then finally, in the city, there's also a lot of partnerships being made around the nation so that more resources and expertise can be brought to bear. But I think actually in Minneapolis, workers do have people to turn to. And Saytool is just one of many organizations that they can reach out to on around many labor violations. So we care about it from the moment you're not getting paid to the moment it's a very large labor trafficking case.
And why is it referred to as trafficking when someone's treated in the labor situation the way you described? I guess I just feel like trafficking sort of means that someone's moved from place to place. Why is it referred to in those terms?
Yeah, that's a common misperception. So the element of movement is not required in the legal definition of labor trafficking. So not to get too wonky, but what
we love wonky around here. You can get as wonky
as
you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the actual legal definition of labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through fraud, force, or coercion. And those, if you have to remember in the legal definition, there's a lot of ors in that.
Yes.
So that might be the recruitment of someone by making them afraid that they have to do it or forcing them to work. So the element of movement is actually not required. I think media often reinforces the idea that you have to be taken across state lines or into different countries. And actually, that's not most often the case. We're often seeing cases both of sexual exploitation and labor exploitation where people are within the same area they may come from or where they came to work, not expecting that something like this could happen.
It almost sounds like that what you're getting after is that there's a sense that employers are trafficking in labor, coercion, force, and fraud, as opposed to the person is being trafficked. Is that at all right? That the trafficking,
no, and I think
is the trafficking referring to that, or is it like trafficking and exploitation? Is that why those two words? Is that how those two words go together?
Yeah, so I think to start, there are many systems that exist in our society that take advantage of people. So I think one of the reasons we like stepping back and saying what are root causes is that sometimes there's one person you can identify clearly as a trafficker, and that's often what people talk about when they talk about sex trafficking. However, there's often other times big systems at play, whether or not it be certain industries, let's say construction, where there are many people involved in exploitation, and there may not be one who you can point to and say, that's certainly the trafficker. It's all elements happening at one time, which is why you often see me interchange the two words.
I see. Well, that's Megan Techney. Megan, thank you so much. And probably because of the work that you're doing, the mayor of Minneapolis did declare January to be Human Trafficking and Exploitation Month in the city of Minneapolis in a declaration, which I think it means that we want less of that, even though it's a strange way to declare, bring an end to it, to declare it Human Trafficking and Exploitation Month. They probably should work on their wording about that a bit. But I think it's probably because of the good work that you all are doing that has prompted Mayor Fry and others to do this work. Just one last quick question, if I could. Systems and areas like Minneapolis is deeply connected to St. Paul and deeply connected to the suburbs and to the counties. Do you all see this work needing to be done specifically in cities, or is there something that needs to be done statewide or countywide that you think in the future is going to be the way forward?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So cities cannot do this alone. As you know, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, many of your social services are actually housed at the county level, and many of the rules that you have to operate under are state laws and federal laws. And the truth is, this is only going to work if everyone's working together. And so it happens to be that right now our investment is in the city, but we're hoping that all the key players at different levels of government are going to be able to come together on it.
Well, we do too. So that's Megan Techney. Megan, thanks so much. Thanks for your good work. Pathways2freedom.org is the website, and you can find it all there. Megan, thanks for being with us today on Minnesota's Progressive Repartee. And friends, we'll be back here after the break.
Hi, this is Laura with Food Freedom Radio, and you are listening to the 4 o'clock repartee, which kind of like means conversation between people or something. Repartee. Repertoire? Something like that.
Hey, I'm Lori Fitz from Connections Radio Show, and I want you to join us for Repartee on the Minnesota Progressive Repartee.
And welcome back. That's exactly what you're doing. Joining us for the Repartee, the witty banter and conversation. Hey, Brett, that was really interesting, I think, talking with Megan Techney from Pathways to Freedom. That's such good work. I think there's so much we're missing in, there's a lot, there are a lot of big issues that we need to change in how we do our business and how capitalism functions in this society. And a lot of us are trying to advocate for ideas that will move us forward. Universalizing healthcare. I think we need to have a guaranteed minimum income, our tax policy, and all the rest. And at the same time, we need to fix and improve and make safe and better the current working conditions, which is what I think working on issues of labor and exploitation and sex trafficking are trying to do, is to really push that boundaries so that we'll start paying attention to those other really important issues that are related to how business is currently being done while we're doing it. It's this torn place that a lot of us feel. Do you advocate most of your energy toward the kind of world you want, or do you turn it toward fixing the world that you find yourself in? And, well, all of us would love for it to be both of those, of course. Time and pressure just seems to feel like we have to choose one or the other at times. So just a lot going on when it comes to that. So I'm really thankful for all that good work that's happening there. Hey, Brett, I don't know if you've already started planning your outfit for the Blue State Ball, but I've started thinking about it already. And I feel like it needs to either be blue-themed or ball-themed. I don't know what I'm going to do. But I was in Phoenix and played golf yesterday. I've started taking up golf again, so it's been something I set aside about 20 years ago, and I've started playing again. And I played with a blue golf ball. Did you know there's blue golf balls? And they're not just like novelty balls either. They're like really good golf balls.
Really? The only colored golf balls I can think of are like when you're out playing mini golf. I didn't know that's actually a thing for serious golf. And you said it's not like a joke. It's actually real.
Not a joke. Real as they come, my friend. Like a Callaway. I played with a Callaway ball. And if that means anything to you, you know too much about golf already. But it's a top quality brand. And it's for people like me who just have a hard time seeing white golf balls. I think it's maybe, for certain, my distance vision is not as great as it used to be, but also something to do with the color. So sometimes people will play with an orange ball or with a bright green ball. Those are fairly common. You'll see those out there. But so are the blue balls. And I only ended up with a blue ball because I bought a pack that I thought was full of 4 sleeves of orange balls, but it turned out it was a multicolored pack with a sleeve of white, sleeve meaning there's 3 balls of white, 3 balls of yellow, 3 balls of orange, and 3 blue balls. And so I was thinking, it's like the Blue State Ball. It's going to be the official thing. I might
bring those out there?
I think I might bring them. I think I might
should.
bring them. It might be it might be kind of fun for us to even think about having some Blue State Ball gifts for us. For people there, little.
Now imagine
little
if you had those balls in some sort of body of water with a wave. Think about that.
Oh, what if we made a wave of blue balls? Okay, we're on to something. That's what you get out of the repartee. You get all that kind of good business. Hey, this is the Minnesota's Progressive Repartee on the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, AM 950. Talk to you tomorrow.